Mia tightened her grip on the handle of the diner's glass door, her breath forming a faint mist on the cold surface. The flickering neon sign above her read, "Rosie's Diner," its glow barely illuminating the cracked pavement beneath her feet. She pushed the door open, the familiar jingle of the bell echoing through the nearly empty diner. The smell of stale coffee and greasy fries greeted her, a scent that had become as much a part of her life as the ache in her feet after a long shift. At 28, Mia had learned to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. Her mother's passing had left her with a mountain of medical bills, and the small apartment she called home was one missed rent payment away from being taken away. But even in the darkest moments, she held on to her mother's words. Kindness will light the way when all else seems dark. The diner was quiet this morning, save for the low hum of the coffee machine and the occasional clatter of dishes from the kitchen. Mia hung her coat on the rusty hook by the staff door and tied her apron around her waist. Carla, the diner's manager, was already at the counter, her arms crossed and her lips pressed into a thin line. "You're late," Carla snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut through the diner's usual calm. Mia glanced at the clock. "Sorry, the bus." "Save it," Carla interrupted, waving a hand dismissively. "We've got customers waiting. Get to work." Mia bit her tongue. Arguing with Carla never ended well. Instead, she grabbed a stack of menus and headed to the first table, a family of 4. The mother looked exhausted, her shoulders slumped as she tried to soothe a fussy toddler. The father stared at the menu, his brow furrowed as if calculating the cost of every item. "Welcome to Rosie's Diner," Mia said, her voice warm and inviting. "We've got a pancake special this morning if you're interested." The mother hesitated, glancing at her husband before nodding. "We'll just share 2 orders," she said softly, her voice tinged with embarrassment. Mia's heart ached. She knew what it was like to count every penny. "Sure thing," she replied, jotting down the order. "I'll bring some extra plates." At the next booth sat Mr. Davies, a regular who came in every morning for his usual cup of coffee. Today, though, he looked more disheveled than usual, his threadbare jacket hanging loosely on his thin frame. "Morning, Mr. Davies," Mia greeted, forcing a smile. "Can I get you your usual?" He fumbled with a few coins on the table, his hands trembling. "I'm a bit short today, dear. I'll just have water." Mia's chest tightened. She couldn't let him sit there with nothing. "Don't worry," she said, her voice gentle. "Coffee's on me." His eyes lit up with gratitude as she poured him a steaming cup. Mia returned to the kitchen, her mind racing. She was already behind on her bills, but the thought of Mr. Davies shivering through a cup of tap water was too much to bear. As she placed the family's order on the pass-through window, Carla's voice cut through the air. "Mia, stop giving away free coffee. We're not a charity." Mia clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. "He's a regular, Carla. He's just having a tough time." Carla rolled her eyes. "Everyone's having a tough time. That doesn't mean we can afford to give away the product." Mia bit back a retort and returned to the dining area, her heart heavy. She glanced at Mr. Davies, who was sipping his coffee with a look of contentment on his face. For a moment she allowed herself to feel a small sense of satisfaction. But, as she cleared a nearby table, she noticed something tucked under the edge of a plate. It was a folded piece of paper, crisp and clean, unlike the worn menus and napkins that usually littered the tables. She picked it up, her curiosity piqued. Unfolding the note, her eyes scanned the words written in neat, bold handwriting. "Kindness is never wasted. Thank you for the light you bring to this place." Beneath the note was a $100 bill. Mia's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes welled up with tears as she clutched the note to her chest. For the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of hope. Mia stepped away from Mr. Davies' booth, her hands trembling as she clutched the stack of dirty dishes. Carla's voice cut through the diner like a knife, sharp and unrelenting. "Mia!" Carla hissed, her tone low but laced with venom. "You're not running a charity. If you give away another freebie, I'll deduct it from your paycheck. You understand?" Mia swallowed hard and nodded, her throat tight. She had lost count of how many times Carla had threatened to dock her, wages over her so-called acts of kindness. But Mia couldn't bring herself to turn a blind eye to hungry kids or freezing seniors. 1 cup of coffee or a shared meal wouldn't bankrupt the diner, but it could mean the world to someone in need. As she turned to head back to the kitchen, she noticed a tall man settling into a corner booth. He wore a well-worn brown jacket and faded jeans, looking every bit like a traveling truck driver. His name was Daniel, and he had been coming into the diner sporadically for the past few weeks. What no one realized, including Mia, was that Daniel wasn't just any customer. He was the undercover owner of Rosie's Diner. Daniel's calm, watchful eyes followed each interaction in the diner. He observed how the staff treated the customers and how the customers responded in turn. There was something quietly inquisitive about him, as if he was measuring the atmosphere of the diner rather than just enjoying a meal. Mia approached his table, forcing a cheerful smile despite the weight pressing on her chest. "Morning," she said, her voice warm. "What can I get for you today?" Daniel looked up, his gaze steady and kind. "Morning, Mia," he replied, already knowing her name from his prior visits. "Could I get a black coffee and the breakfast? Special?" "Absolutely," Mia said, scribbling down his order. She couldn't help but notice his casual demeanor. Unlike most customers, Daniel never complained about wait times or criticized the menu. There was something reassuring about his presence, though Mia couldn't quite put her finger on it. As Daniel waited for his food, Mia busied herself with other customers. The family of 4 had finished their shared pancakes and left a note under their check. Mia picked it up, her heart swelling as she read the words, "Breakfast is on me. Have a wonderful day." She hadn't expected anything in return. She didn't want them to feel indebted. She just wanted to help. But the small gesture of gratitude brought a lump to her throat. Carla, however, was less than impressed. "Mia!" she barked, cornering her as she carried a stack of dirty dishes. "I know you're giving meals away. This is coming straight out of your paycheck." Without waiting for an argument, Carla snatched the check and stormed off to the foyer. "A register." Mia stood there, the dishes clattering in her shaking hands. Her eyes stung with unshed tears. She was already struggling to make ends meet, and now she'd be paying for other people's meals out of her own pocket. It felt unfair, but she wouldn't change what she'd done. If someone was hungry, she had to help. A few minutes later, Daniel's breakfast was ready. Mia composed herself and delivered his plate, keeping her usual bright smile intact. "Here you go," she said, setting the plate down in front of him. "Thank you," Daniel replied, giving her a small nod. He took a few bites in thoughtful silence, his eyes occasionally flicking toward Carla, who was now in the kitchen, scolding another employee about inventory costs. Her voice carried through the diner, harsh and unyielding. Mia passed by Mr. Davies's booth again, refilling his coffee without a word. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. "You're too kind, dear," he said softly. Mia smiled, though her heart was heavy. "It's just coffee," she replied. But as she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Daniel's watchful gaze lingered on her, and for a moment she wondered if he saw more than he let on. Mia refilled Mr. Davies's coffee, her hands steady despite the storm brewing inside her. She forced an apologetic smile at Daniel, who sat, quietly, in his corner booth. His calm presence was a stark contrast to the chaos Carla was stirring up in the kitchen. When Daniel finished his meal, he pulled out his wallet and motioned for the check. Mia approached, expecting the usual routine, a polite thank you and maybe a small tip, but instead Daniel handed her a folded bill wrapped around a note. "This is for your kindness," he said softly, his voice carrying a warmth that made Mia's chest tighten. "And for the meals you've given others too." Mia thanked him, tucking the folded paper into her apron pocket. She didn't open it right away. Customers sometimes left sweet thank you messages or small tips, and she didn't want to seem ungrateful by checking it in front of him. As Daniel stood to leave, Mia shot him a grateful look, still unaware of who he truly was. His modest exterior gave no hint of the role he played behind the scenes. Once he was out the door, Mia noticed Carla was busy berating the dishwasher in the back. Seizing the moment, she ducked into a quiet corner and unfolded the note. Her breath hitched. Inside was a $1,000 bill, along with a message written in neat, bold handwriting. Keep shining your light. Thank you for showing what real compassion looks like. Daniel. Mia's hands trembled as she clutched the note. $1,000 was more than she took home in weeks of wages, especially after Carla's constant deductions. Tears blurred her vision, and she hastily swiped at them, afraid someone might see. Overwhelmed by relief and gratitude, she pressed the note against her chest, her heart pounding. Who was Daniel? No typical customer would leave that kind of tip for a waitress. Yet Mia couldn't begin to guess his secret, that he was, in fact, the diner's owner, testing the waters of his own establishment. All she knew was that for the first time in forever, she felt a ray of hope. Maybe she could catch up on rent, buy some groceries, or even pay down part of her mother's medical debt. Her thoughts spun as she tucked the money away, trying to compose herself before Carla noticed her tears. She promised herself she'd honor Daniel's message by continuing to help people, no matter the cost. That evening, Mia trudged up the narrow staircase to her tiny apartment. The overhead light flickered to life, casting a dim glow on the peeling wallpaper and second-hand furniture. She collapsed onto her couch, carefully taking the folded bills from her apron pocket. The reality of the money in her hands overwhelmed her. Sobs rose up, equal parts relief and disbelief. For once, it seemed like life was giving her a break. After drying her tears, she made a plan. She could pay half her rent tonight, buy some groceries, and still put something toward her mother's lingering medical debt. The thought made her breathe a little easier. Before she turned in for the night, she whispered a silent thank you to Daniel's note, promising herself she would keep paying kindness forward. The next morning at the diner, the tension was palpable even before Mia clocked in. Carla was more agitated than usual, barking orders at anyone within earshot. Mia tried to stay out of the line of fire, focusing on her tables and ensuring smooth service. Yet every time she passed Carla, the manager's eyes cut to her apron, pocket, as if expecting to catch her stealing. Mia kept her head down, her mind replaying Daniel's words. Keep shining your light. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, she felt a flicker of hope. The breakfast rush was in full swing, and the diner buzzed with the clatter of dishes and the hum of conversation. Mia moved quickly between tables, her apron stained with coffee and syrup, her mind racing. She couldn't shake the unease that had settled in her stomach after Tina's earlier comments. Tina, the tall, perpetually smirking server with a knack for gossip, had sauntered over earlier that morning. I saw you talking to that truck driver yesterday, she'd said, leaning in conspiratorially. He left you a big tip, huh? Mia had frozen, her heart skipping a beat. Just a standard tip, she lied, not wanting to stoke any rumors. Nothing special. Tina had raised her brows in mock surprise. Is that so? Strange. Because I thought I saw you tearing up after you read a note from him. Mia had pressed her lips together, choosing her words carefully. It was just a kind message, she replied softly, turning away to refill a coffee pot. But Tina's voice had carried a mocking edge. Must be nice, scoring big tips for all that charity work. You know Carla's watching, right? She doesn't like freebies. Mia had exhaled sharply. I know. Just watch yourself, Tina added, tossing. Her hair. It'd be a shame if someone misunderstood your intentions. The words had hung in the air like a subtle threat. Mia had hurried to the next booth without responding, an uneasy chill settling in her stomach. Something about Tina's tone suggested trouble, but Mia tried to brush off the worry. She couldn't imagine that Tina would go out of her way to sabotage her, right? By late afternoon, Daniel reappeared, once again taking his usual seat by the window. He ordered a simple burger and fries, nodding politely as Mia took his request. Her pulse quickened as she greeted him, the memory of his generosity still fresh in her mind. She wanted to say thank you, but the timing wasn't right. Carla was only a few feet away, barking instructions at a cook about controlling waste. So Mia offered Daniel her usual warm smile and hurried back to the kitchen. During a brief lull, she risked a quick glance in his direction. He was watching her again, his gaze quietly observant. She wondered whether he might be a reporter, there to write a feel-good story about waitresses in small towns. The thought filled her with a mix of hope and anxiety. If he was collecting information, what if Carla found out? What if it stirred even more problems? Finally, Mia mustered the courage to approach him as he finished his meal. "Everything okay?" she asked, feeling oddly nervous. He nodded. "It's great. You're doing an excellent job, as always." Mia lowered her voice. "I appreciate your kindness yesterday. That was unexpected." Daniel gave her a reassuring look. "You do a lot for people who can't afford it. That matters." Unsure how to respond, Mia started to ask if he was a journalist, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she simply nodded and retreated to the kitchen, her mind racing. As she cleared a nearby table, she noticed Carla watching her from the corner of the diner. The manager's eyes narrowed, and Mia felt a knot of dread tighten in her chest. She didn't know what Carla had heard or seen, but she knew one thing for certain. Trouble was brewing. The loud clatter of cups slamming onto the countertop made Mia jump. Carla, who had been glaring from behind the counter, shot her a look that could freeze fire. The tense atmosphere returned at once, and Mia mumbled a quick thank you to Daniel before scurrying away. Daniel settled his bill, leaving another tip, significantly smaller but still generous, and walked out. As the dinner rush began, Mia tried to focus on her work, but Tina's sabotage took on a more insidious tone. First, Mia noticed napkins knocked onto the floor near her station. Then, an entire sugar container went missing, only to reappear behind the register, where Carla insisted Mia must have misplaced it. Every time, Tina was nearby, offering an innocent shrug and claiming ignorance. The real trouble came later that evening. Mia was tallying up her family's bill when Carla stomped over, her face thunderous. "Mia!" Carla barked, her voice sharp enough to cut through the diner's usual hum. "Come to the back. Now!" Mia's heart pounded as she followed Carla into the cramped office space behind the kitchen. Tina was already there, arms folded, wearing a look of forced concern. Carla pointed an accusing finger at Mia's apron. "Tina found this in the break room," she said, thrusting a wad of crumpled bills in Mia's face. "Care to explain why diner money was hidden in your apron pocket?" Mia's eyes widened. She shook her head in disbelief. I don't know where that came from." Tina raised her eyebrows. "I saw her rummaging around the register earlier. Maybe she got tempted." "That's not true," Mia protested, her voice trembling. "I would never steal." Carla's gaze was ice cold. "You're always giving out free meals and coffee. Are you trying to cover it up by pilfering from the till?" Tremors of panic ran through Mia. She recalled the $1,000 tip from Daniel, but that was in her personal purse at home. These bills were entirely different. Someone had clearly planted them to frame her. She shook her head, trying to keep her voice steady. "Carla, you know I wouldn't do that. Please, check the register, records." But Carla cut her off. "Enough. Hand over your apron, clock out and go home. You're suspended until I can sort this out." Tears burned in Mia's eyes. She looked at Tina, who feigned a sympathetic sigh. Guilt churned in Mia's stomach. She couldn't prove her innocence, and Daniel, her one ally, was nowhere to be seen. Terrified and humiliated, Mia slowly removed her apron and set it on Carla's desk. Her hands shook as she clocked out, the weight of the accusation pressing down on her chest. As she stepped out into the cool evening air, Mia felt a wave of despair wash over her. She didn't know how to fight back against Tina's lies or Carla's harsh judgment. All she had was her integrity, and even that seemed to count for nothing. But as she walked home, clutching her purse tightly, she thought of Daniel's note. Keep shining your light. She didn't know if she could, but she promised herself she'd try. Mia stumbled into the hallway, feeling numb. Her mind raced as she overheard Carla muttering about calling the diner's owner to report the theft. That's when it hit her. If the owner heard about the accusation, he might close Rosie's diner altogether or fire her on the spot. Worst of all, Mia would lose her only source of income. Her heart pounded so loudly it drowned out the clanging of dishes and the sizzle of the grill. She grabbed her jacket and hurried out the back door, the cool night air stinging her cheeks and mingling with the tears she couldn't hold back any longer. The day had started with a glimmer of hope, but now she was on the verge of losing everything. Mia's mind swirled with betrayal, fear, and the painful question of what she would do next. The little money she had left from Daniel's tip might keep her bills at bay for a short time, but losing her job would crush her. The next few days were a blur. Mia spent them cooped up in her cramped apartment, trying to quell the sense of panic that threatened to overwhelm her. Being suspended from Rosie's diner felt like losing her anchor. She couldn't stop replaying the scene in Carla's office, the accusation hanging over her like a dark cloud. When she mustered the courage to check her mailbox, she found a stack of bills waiting for her: electric, water, and another envelope, from her landlord hinting at eviction if she didn't pay the overdue rent soon. The only silver lining was the $1,000 tip Daniel had given her. Thanks to that unexpected gift, she scraped together just enough to settle part of her rent, staving off eviction for a little while. Even so, Mia couldn't help but feel guilty. That money should have gone straight to her mother's medical debts. But if she lost her apartment, there'd be no point in paying hospital bills from the street. As the days wore on, Mia felt her spirit dimming. She tried searching online for part-time jobs, anything to keep the lights on, but nothing came up. Word in a small town travelled fast, and rumours about her alleged theft at Rosie's diner seemed to grow more dramatic with every telling. If Carla truly believed she was guilty, a bad reference could shut every door in town. Mia stayed indoors, pacing the threadbare rug, wishing she had a way to prove her innocence. One afternoon, a soft knock sounded at her apartment door. Mia hesitated. Most visitors were bill collectors or neighbours asking if she had any spare sugar. But when she opened the door, she found Mr. Davies, the elderly customer from the diner, standing in the hallway. He clutched a plastic bag of groceries in one hand and a shaky cane in the other. "Mr. Davies," she stammered, "how did you—" "Carla told me you were taking some time off," he said carefully, avoiding the word suspended. "You forgot to give me my senior discount before you left." He forced a kind smile. "So, I figured I'd track you down. A friend from church told me where you live." Mia's eyes prickled with tears. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Davies. There was an incident, and—" He didn't let her finish. "Well, you've always been kind to me, paying for my coffee when I was short. I thought it was only right I returned the favour." He held up the bag. "A little something to get you by. There's some soup, bread, a few canned goods. Not much, but I hope it helps." Mia was too choked up to speak. Finally, she managed a small "thank you," her hands trembling as she took the bag. The gesture reminded her that there were people who believed in her integrity, no matter what rumours flew around the diner. As Mr. Davies hobbled away with a tip of his hat, Mia stood in the doorway, teary-eyed but touched. That same evening, Mia tried to call the diner to talk to Carla, or at least beg for a chance to plead her case. Mia sat on her couch staring at her phone. She had tried calling the diner multiple times, but each time the line rang without an answer. Frustrated, she turned to social media, only to discover that a group of regular customers had started an online petition demanding that Rosie's Diner reinstate her. Comments flooded the page, filled with stories of how Mia had gone out of her way to serve free coffee or slip a few dollars to those who needed it. Seeing people rally around her warmed her heart, but it also made her wonder why Daniel hadn't spoken up on her behalf. In the back of her mind, a nagging doubt formed. Maybe Daniel was just a generous stranger who happened to have spare cash. Or maybe Tina's rumor spreading had made him question her honesty. As the days dragged on, her confusion gave way to frustration. Late one night, as Mia tossed and turned, on her couch she spotted headlights beaming through her thin curtains. Her heart pounded as she peeked outside. A familiar brown jacket emerged from the driver's seat of a sleek car. Daniel's jacket. Mia's eyes widened. This wasn't the old truck she usually saw him drive, and what was he doing here at her apartment building? Quietly, she cracked her front door open, trying not to alert him. Her apartment overlooked the parking lot, and from her vantage point, she could see Daniel meeting with someone near a street lamp. At first, she couldn't make out the other figure, but the harsh voice that drifted through the still night air made her stomach clench. Carla. They were talking in hushed tones, their faces partially illuminated by the street lamp. Mia strained to catch snippets of their conversation, something about financial reports, staff performance, and the risk of closure. As Carla waved her arms angrily, Daniel seemed calm, as if he were in charge. A wave of panic and betrayal washed over Mia. Why was Daniel, the man who had been so kind to her, meeting with the very person who had suspended her? She clenched her fists, fury mixing with hurt. Was he part of this whole scheme to frame her? Did he tip her generously just to watch how she'd react, only to let Carla paint her as a thief? Mia felt a sudden need for answers. Overcome by a rush of adrenaline, she grabbed her shoes and sprinted down the apartment steps. By the time she reached the parking lot, Carla's voice was fading. Mia caught a glimpse of them heading toward Daniel's car. Without thinking twice, she called out, "Daniel, hey, I need to talk to you." Carla spun around in surprise, while Daniel turned slowly, his expression unreadable. Carla glowered at Mia. "What are you doing here?" she snapped. "Shouldn't you be—" "Stop," Mia cut in, her voice trembling but determined. "Daniel, why are you meeting with Carla? What's going on?" Carla's face blanched with anger. She looked like she wanted to protest, but Daniel raised a hand, stopping her cold. He took a few steps toward Mia, calm yet serious. "Mia," he said softly, "I'm sorry you had to find out this way." "Find out what?" she demanded, tears in her eyes. "That you've been working with Carla all along?" He shook his head. "No, that's not it." Mia glanced from Daniel to Carla, feeling every beat of her hammering heart. "Then tell me, who are you, and why have you been watching me? Are you two collaborating to shut down the diner or ruin my reputation?" A deep sigh left Daniel's lips. He looked regretful, as though he hadn't wanted to reveal his secret under these circumstances. "I own Rosie's Diner, Mia," he said. "I've been going in undercover for the last few weeks to see how things run when no one knows I'm the boss." Mia's mouth fell open. She felt lightheaded, as though the ground had been pulled out from under her. Mia's world tilted as Daniel's words sank in. He owned Rosie's Diner. He had been there all along, watching, observing, and testing. Her mind raced, replaying every interaction, every kind word, every moment of quiet support. It all made sense now, but the revelation left her feeling both relieved and betrayed. "So this was some kind of test?" she asked, tears burning in her eyes. "You tipped me $1,000 just to see what I'd do, and then you let Carla suspend me without defending me." Daniel's eyes flickered with sympathy. "I never wanted you to be hurt. I've been trying to gather evidence of wrongdoing. I'm sorry if it looked like I abandoned you." Mia's heart pounded. She wasn't sure whether to be relieved or furious. "Then why didn't you step in when Tina framed me for stealing?" Carla interjected, but Daniel cut her off with a firm, "Because you, Carla." He turned back to Mia, his voice steady. I needed proof. If I had intervened too soon, we wouldn't have caught the real culprits behind the cash discrepancies. I just found out Tina's been taking money out of the till and blaming you. I've been getting my figures from Carla, but I never approved your suspension. Mia stared at him, her mouth dry. All this time, she had thought Daniel was simply a quiet truck driver. Now she discovered he not only owned the diner, but had also been orchestrating this undercover investigation. It felt surreal, like something out of a TV show. Carla shifted uncomfortably. So, does this mean you're not pressing charges against her? She asked, her voice lacking its usual smugness. Daniel gave Carla a cool look. I think we need to have a conversation back at the diner. But for now, he said, turning to Mia, I'd like you to come back to work, if you still want to. We'll clear your name and set the record straight. A swirl of relief, anger, and disbelief churned in Mia's chest. Her life had turned upside down in a matter of days. I don't know what to say, she murmured. Daniel stepped closer, his gaze steady. Say yes, we need you. The diner needs you, and I owe you an apology. Let me make this right. Mia swallowed hard, unsure if she should hug him or scold him. She remembered Mr. Davies's kindness, the support of her customers, and the $1,000 tip that had kept a roof over her head. Finally, she nodded, tears shining in her eyes. Carla exhaled sharply, looking anywhere but at Mia. Meanwhile, Daniel offered a reassuring half-smile. In that moment, Mia realized the truth. Everything she thought she knew was changing. She wasn't just a suspended waitress anymore. She was a central figure in the diner's future, and although she was shaken, a glimmer of hope began to rise in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, this undercover owner's plan would lead to something better, for her, for the diner, and for everyone who believed in kindness. Mia stood outside Rosie's diner the next morning, her stomach roiling with nervous energy. The neon sign buzzed overhead, half the letters flickering in defiance of the early hour. A knot of uncertainty twisted inside her. She had agreed to return, but every step toward the door felt like a gamble on her future. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting to see Daniel's car in the lot. To her relief and slight dismay, he was already inside. His sleek sedan sat parked beside Carla's compact car. Stealing her resolve, Mia inhaled and pushed open the door. Inside, the usual breakfast bustle hummed. Customers filled the booths, and the aroma of coffee and bacon was as familiar as an old friend. But this morning, something was different. At the far end of the diner, Daniel and Carla stood near the counter. A hush fell as they noticed Mia. Carla's expression was guarded, but Daniel offered a small nod, as if to say, "We've got this. Just trust me." Mia approached slowly, her eyes flicking to Tina, who was refilling salt shakers near the kitchen pass-through. Tina wore a forced, tight-lipped smile that failed to mask her unease. Mia couldn't help feeling a surge of anger at the woman who had framed her, but she reminded herself to focus on the bigger picture. Daniel planned to confront everyone today, and the truth would come to light. Carla folded her arms. "Let's get this over with," she muttered, casting a sideways glance at Daniel. He seemed unbothered by her attitude. Clearing his throat, Daniel looked around to ensure they had enough privacy. A few employees stood awkwardly behind the counter, listening. "First things first," he began, his voice calm but firm. "I want you all to know who I really am. My name is Daniel Mason. I'm the owner of Rosie's Diner. I've been visiting, undercover for the past several weeks, posing as a customer to see how this place operates day to day." A wave of murmurs rippled through the diner. Some employees looked stunned, while others exchanged knowing glances. Certain customers had wondered why Daniel was always so observant. But none had guessed the truth. Tina set down the salt shaker, her face draining of color. Carla, maintaining her facade of confidence, shrugged. So they know you're the owner now. Big deal. We have a business to run. Daniel raised an eyebrow. A business that's been plagued by theft, mismanagement, and a toxic work environment. Carla's smug expression faltered. What are you talking about? Daniel turned to the staff, his gaze steady. Over the past few weeks, I've seen the best and worst of this diner. I've seen employees like Mia go above and beyond to help customers, even when it cost them personally. And I've seen others take advantage of the system, stealing from the till and blaming innocent people. Tina's hands trembled as she clutched the salt shaker. I didn't. Enough, Daniel said, cutting her off. I have the proof. Tina, you've been stealing money and framing Mia for it. And Carla, you've been turning a blind eye to it, more concerned with maintaining control than running this diner properly. The room fell silent. Mia's heart pounded as she watched the color drain from Tina's face. Carla opened her mouth to protest, but Daniel held up a hand. This ends today, he said. Mia, I owe you an apology. You've been the heart of this diner, and I let you down by not stepping in sooner. But I'm here now, and I'm going to make this right. Mia's eyes filled with tears as she looked at Daniel. For the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope. The diner fell silent as Daniel's words hung in the air. All eyes darted from Carla to Tina, the tension palpable. Mia kept her gaze low, fighting the urge to shout, I told you so. She wanted to preserve some dignity, even as her heart raced with a mix of relief and vindication. It's come to my attention, Daniel continued, his voice steady and calm, that certain employees have been pocketing money from the register and blaming others, namely Mia, for the losses. Tina's hands trembled slightly, and she took a step back, bumping into a table behind her. Carla, sensing a tidal shift, shot Tina an icy look, as if to say, Don't drag me down with you. But Tina remained silent, her lips pressed together. Daniel nodded toward Mia. Mia has been the scapegoat in all this. She was suspended for an alleged theft she never committed. After reviewing the records, thankfully we keep thorough logs, and checking the surveillance feed from previous weeks, I've confirmed that Tina was taking money from the till on multiple occasions. Tina's face paled, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. I only took a little, she stammered, looking to Carla for backup. But Carla's expression remained stony, offering no support. Daniel lifted a hand. Before we go into more details, I need to address Carla's role. Carla, I trusted you to manage this diner responsibly. Instead, you allowed these rumors to fester. You suspended Mia without solid evidence, deducted legitimate freebies from her paycheck, and created a hostile work environment. Our customers, they are complaining. Staff morale is at an all-time low, and the diner's reputation is suffering. Carla's cheeks flushed. She sputtered. I only did what I thought was best for the diner's bottom line. By threatening employees, Daniel cut in, his voice taking on a harder edge. By forcing out one of the kindest servers we have. You saw Mia's generosity as a liability, but she's the reason many of our customers keep coming back. He shook his head. This can't go on. Silence weighed heavily in the diner, a few regulars who had paused mid-bite to watch. The confrontation muttered in agreement. Finally, Daniel turned back to Carla. You're relieved of your duties, effective immediately. Carla's eyes flared. You can't fire me. I've been running this place for years. Yes, Daniel said gently. And I appreciate the years of service you gave when it was done well. But this toxic culture ends now. I'll pay your severance according to your contract. After that, we go our separate ways. Carla swallowed hard, her bravado slipping. She glanced around, but no one stepped forward to defend her. With a huff, she snatched her purse from behind the counter, storming past tables of stunned customers, and pushed out through the diner's front door. Daniel let out a long breath, then shifted his focus to Tina. As for you, he said quietly, stealing from the register and framing a coworker is grounds for immediate termination. I'll be pressing charges if the amount exceeds what can be resolved amicably. Tina crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. I'm sorry, she whispered, a quiver in her voice. My bills are… Daniel held up a hand. I understand that times are tough, but stealing isn't the answer. We'll discuss the details later. For now, you're suspended pending further investigation. Tina nodded, her shoulders shaking as she hurried out of the diner, leaving behind a stunned silence. Daniel turned to Mia, his expression softening. Mia, I owe you an apology. You've been the heart of this diner, and I let you down by not stepping in sooner. But I'm here now, and I'm going to make this right. Mia's eyes filled with tears as she looked at Daniel. For the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope. Tina's admission hung in the air, met with a stony silence. My bills were too high, she said, her voice trembling. And when I saw Mia giving away food, I thought maybe no one would notice if a little money was missing. Mia felt a pang of complicated sympathy. She too struggled with bills, but the choice to steal and frame someone else was something she could never condone. Daniel's expression was resolute. I can't overlook this, he said. You'll have a chance to make restitution, but you can't work here anymore. Tina wiped her eyes and nodded numbly, shuffling toward the door. The tension in the diner lifted as soon as she was gone, replaced by a mixture of relief and curiosity. All eyes fell on Mia, who stood stiffly, uncertain how to react now that her name was cleared. Daniel offered a kind smile. Mia, your suspension is officially lifted. If you'll have us, I'd like you to come back, and not just as a server. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in. Carla's position is open. I need someone who understands. Compassion. Someone who can rebuild trust with customers and staff. The diner deserves a manager who leads by example. I'd like that to be you. Mia's eyes widened in disbelief. She had never pictured herself as a manager. The idea of taking on more responsibility, especially after barely making ends meet, felt overwhelming. But the memory of Daniel's generosity and the support she'd received from her customers fueled a wave of determination. I don't know if I'm qualified, she admitted, her voice trembling. I've never managed anything but my own chaos. Daniel chuckled. Softly, relief etched on his face. Leadership isn't about fancy degrees. It's about heart and integrity. You've been keeping this place afloat with your kindness. That's the quality we need. Mia thought of all the people she'd served, the family she'd helped, Mr. Davis's sweet gesture of bringing her groceries. She thought of the petition to reinstate her. Maybe being a manager was about ensuring no one got left behind. Feeling a surge of gratitude and hope, she nodded. All right, I'll do it, but I'll need your help. Daniel's grin lit up the room. I wouldn't offer if I wasn't willing to guide you. He raised his voice so the rest of the diner could hear. Everyone, meet your new manager. Let's show her the support she deserves. A few employees broke into applause, and the customers followed, some hooting in celebration. Mia felt heat flood her cheeks, but this time it wasn't from embarrassment. It was a deep sense of belonging she hadn't felt in a long while. In the days and weeks that followed, Rosie's diner underwent a quiet renaissance. Carla's old office was transformed into a space of collaboration and creativity. Mia worked closely with Daniel to implement changes, fairer schedules, better wages, and a policy of kindness that extended to both customers and staff. The diner became more than just a place to eat. It became a community hub, a beacon of hope in a small town. And Mia, once a struggling waitress, found herself at the heart of it all, leading with the same compassion that had always guided her. Carla's old office became Mia's base of operations, though she spent more time on the floor, greeting guests and helping in the kitchen during rush hours. She introduced a pay-it-forward wall, a simple corkboard near the entrance where customers could buy a future meal for someone in need. Colourful sticky notes soon covered the board, each representing a prepaid meal or a random act of kindness. Within weeks, it became the diner's most talked about feature, drawing even more patrons. Daniel kept his promise of mentorship. He guided Mia through inventory checks, labor costs, and budgeting, none of which came naturally to her. Despite the challenges, she powered through, determined to prove she deserved this second chance. The staff, once cautious about her kindness, began to see the benefits of a nurturing environment. Morale lifted, and some of the regulars who had stopped coming because of Carla's harsh management returned in droves. One quiet evening after locking up, Mia and Daniel shared a moment at the counter. The diner was empty except for the hum of the neon sign outside. Mia glanced at Daniel. "Did you ever think we'd end up here? You, an undercover boss, and me, a manager?" Daniel laughed softly. "I had no idea I'd find someone so genuine. A person who proved compassion is a business asset, not a liability." She smiled. "Thank you for giving me this opportunity." He shook his head. "You earned it, and don't forget, you were the one who inspired me. Watching you put others first made me realize that kindness can be the foundation for a successful diner. You showed me how a business can do more than turn a profit." Mia felt tears sting her eyes again. This time, tears of gratitude and fulfillment. Together, they walked out into the crisp evening air, flipping the closed sign on the front door. The newly polished windows reflected the warm glow inside, an echo of the kindness that now defined Rosie's diner. As they locked up and headed off into the night, Mia couldn't help but feel that her mother's words had never been more true. Kindness would light the way when all else seemed dark.